Hi! Before we get into today's amazing video, do remember to check out my Patreon page. If you're enjoying the content on my YouTube channel, then if you go over to my Patreon page, James Dobinson Audiobooks, link in the description, you'll find a whole load more amazing content, including Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, The Hunger Games, and David Walliams. And as I say, so much more as well. So, head over there, and if you're enjoying The Mark of Athena, the next episode is already available on my Patreon page, the final epic conclusion to this amazing book. So do go and check it out. Content over there will be available 1 week earlier than on my YouTube channel, so if you just can't wait, head over there, and for a small subscription each month, you can have access to it to download it and keep. Anyway, let's get into today's exciting episode of The Mark of Athena, Heroes of Olympus. Chapter 37. Leo. Leo wished he wasn't so good. Really, sometimes it was just embarrassing. If he hadn't had such an eye for mechanical stuff, they might never have found the secret chute, got lost in the underground, and been attacked by metal dudes, but he just couldn't help himself. Part of it was Hazel's fault. For a girl with super underground senses, she wasn't much good in Rome. She kept leading them around and around the city, getting dizzy and doubling back. "Sorry," she said, "it's just, there's so much underground here, so many layers that it's overwhelming. Like standing in the middle of an orchestra and trying to concentrate on a single instrument. I'm going deaf." As a result, they got a tour of Rome. Frank seemed happy to plod along like a big sheepdog. Leo wondered if he could turn into one of those, or even better, a horse that Leo could ride. But Leo started to get impatient. His feet were sore, the day was sunny and hot, and the streets were choked with tourists. The Forum was okay, but it was mostly ruins overgrown with bushes and trees. It took a lot of imagination to see it as the bustling centre of ancient Rome. Leo could only manage it because he'd seen New Rome in California. They passed big churches, freestanding arches, clothing stores and fast food restaurants. One statue of some ancient Roman dude seemed to be pointing to a nearby McDonald's. On the wider streets, the car traffic was absolutely nuts. Man, Leo thought people in Houston drove crazy, but they spent most of their time weaving through small alleys, coming across fountains and little cafes where Leo was not allowed to rest. "Never thought I'd get to see Rome," Hazel said. "When I was alive, I mean the first time, Mussolini was in charge. We were at war." "Mussolini?" Leo frowned. "Wasn't he like BFFs with Hitler?" Hazel stared at him like he was an alien. "BFFs? Never mind." "I'd love to see the Trevi Fountain," she said. "There's a fountain on every block," Leo grumbled. "Or the Spanish Steps," Hazel said. "Why would you come to Italy to see Spanish Steps?" Leo asked. "That's like going to China for Mexican food, isn't it?" "You're hopeless," Hazel complained. "So I've been told." She turned to Frank and grabbed his hand, as if Leo had ceased to exist. "Come on, I think we should go this way." Frank gave Leo a confused smile, like he couldn't decide whether to gloat or to thank Leo for being a doofus, but he cheerfully let Hazel drag him along. After walking forever, Hazel stopped in front of a church. At least, Leo assumed it was a church. The main section had a big domed roof. The entrance had a triangular roof, typical Roman columns and an inscription across the top. M. Agrippa. Something or other. Latin for get a grip, Leo speculated. "This is our best bet." Hazel sounded more certain than she had all day. There should be a secret passage somewhere inside. Tour groups milled around the steps. Guides held up coloured placards with different numbers and lectured in dozens of languages, like they were playing some kind of international bingo. Leo listened to the Spanish tour guide for a few seconds, and then he reported to his friends. "This is the Pantheon. It was originally built by Marcus Agrippa as a temple to the gods. After it burned down, Emperor Hadrian rebuilt it, and it's been standing for 2,000 years. It's one of the best preserved Roman buildings in the world." Frank and Hazel stared at him. "How did you know that?" Hazel asked. "I'm naturally brilliant." "Centaur poop," Frank said. "He's eavesdropped on a tour group." Leo grinned. "Maybe. Come on, let's go find that secret passage. I hope this place has air conditioning." Of course, no AC. On the bright side, there were no lines and no admission fee, so they just muscled their way past the tour groups and walked on in. The interior was pretty impressive, considering it had been constructed 2,000 years ago. The marble floor was patterned with squares and circles, like a Roman tic-tac-toe game. The main space was one huge chamber with a circular rotunda, sort of like a Capitol building back in the States. Lining the walls were different shrines and statues and tombs and stuff, but the real eye-catcher was the dome overhead. All the light in the building came from one circular opening right at the top. A beam of sunlight slanted into the rotunda and glowed on the floor, like Zeus was up there with a magnifying glass, trying to fry puny humans. Leo was no architect like Annabeth, But he could appreciate the engineering. The Romans had made the dome out of big stone panels, but they'd hollowed out each panel in a square within square pattern. It looked cool. Leo figured it also made the dome lighter and easier to support. He didn't mention that to his friends. He doubted they would care, but if Annabeth were here, she would have spent the whole day talking about it. Thinking about that made Leo wonder how she was doing on her Mark of Athena expedition. Leo never thought he'd feel this way, but he was worried about the scary blonde girl. Hazel stopped in the middle of the room and turned in a circle. This is amazing. In the old days, the children of Vulcan would come here in secret to consecrate demigod weapons. This is where imperial gold was enchanted. Leo wondered how that worked. He imagined a bunch of demigods in dark robes trying to quietly roll a scorpion ballista through the front doors. But we're not here because of that, he guessed. No, Hazel said. There's an entrance, a tunnel that will lead us towards Nico. I can sense it close by. I'm not sure where. Frank grunted. This building is 2,000 years old. It makes sense there could be some kind of secret passage left over from the Roman days. That's when Leo made his mistake of simply being too good. He scanned the temple's interior, thinking, if I were designing a secret passage, where would I put it? He could sometimes figure out how a machine works by putting his hand on it. He learned to fly a helicopter that way. He'd fixed Festus the dragon that way, before Festus crashed and burned. Once he'd even reprogrammed the electronic billboards in Times Square to read, "All the ladies love Leo," accidentally, of course. Now he tried to sense the workings of this ancient building. He turned towards a red marble altar-looking thing with a statue of the Virgin Mary on the top. Over there, he said. He marched confidently to the shrine. It was shaped sort of like a fireplace, with an arched recess at the bottom. The mantle was inscribed with a name, like a tomb. The passage is around here, he said. This guy's final resting place is the way. Raphael somebody? Famous painter, I think, Hazel said. Leo shrugged. He had a cousin named Raphael, and he didn't think much of the name. He wondered if he could produce a stick of dynamite from his tool belt and do a little discreet demolition, but he figured the caretakers of this place probably wouldn't approve. Hold on. Leo looked around to make sure they weren't being watched. Most of the tour groups were gawking at the dome, but one trio made Leo uneasy. About 50 feet away, some overweight middle-aged dudes with American accents were conversing loudly, complaining to each other about the heat. They looked like manatees stuffed with beach clothes, sandals, walking shorts, touristy t-shirts and floppy hats. Their legs were big and pasty and covered with spider veins. The guys acted extremely bored, and Leo wondered why they were hanging around. They weren't watching him. Leo wasn't sure why they made him nervous. Maybe he just didn't like manatees. Forget them, Leo told himself. He slipped around the side of the tomb. He ran his hand down the back of a Roman column, all the way to the base. Right at the bottom, a series of lines had been etched into the marble. Roman numerals. Hey, Leo said. Not very elegant, but effective. What is? Frank asked. The combination for a lock. He felt around the back of the column some more and discovered a square hole about the size of an electrical socket. The lock face itself has been ripped out. Probably vandalised sometime in the last few centuries, but I should be able to control the mechanism inside if I can... Leo placed his hand on the marble floor. He could sense old bronze gears under the surface of the stone. Regular bronze would have corroded and become unusable long ago, but these were celestial bronze, the handiwork of a demigod. With a little willpower, Leo urged them to move, using the Roman numerals to guide him. The cylinders turned. Click, click, click. Then click, click. On the floor next to the wall, one section of marble tile slid under another, revealing a dark square opening barely large enough to wiggle through. Romans must have been small. Leo looked at Frank appraisingly. You'll need to change into something thinner to get through there. That's not nice, Hazel chided. What? Just saying. Don't worry about it, Frank mumbled. We should go get the others before we explore. That's what Piper said. They're halfway across the city, Leo reminded him. Besides, I'm not sure I can close this hatch again. The gears are pretty old. Great, Frank said. How do we know it's safe down there? Hazel knelt. She put her hand over the opening as if checking the temperature. There's nothing alive, at least not for several hundred feet. The tunnel slants down and then levels out and goes south, more or less. I don't sense any traps. How can you tell all that? Leo asked. She shrugged. Same way you can pick locks on marble columns, I guess. I'm glad you're not into robbing banks. Oh, bank vaults, Leo said. Never thought about that. Forget I said anything, Hazel sighed. Look, it's not 3 o'clock yet. We can at least do a little exploring. Try to pinpoint Nico's location before we contact the others. You two stay here until I call for you. I want to check things out. Make sure the tunnel is structurally sound. I'll be able to tell more once I'm underground. Frank scowled. We can't let you go down by yourself. You could get hurt. Frank, I can take care of myself, she said. Underground is my speciality. It's safest for all of us if I go first. Unless Frank wants to turn into a mole, Leo suggested, or a prairie dog. Those things are awesome. Shut up, Frank mumbled. Or a badger. Frank jabbed a finger at Leo's face. Valdez, I swear. Both of you, be quiet, Hazel scolded. I'll be back soon. Give me 10 minutes. If you don't hear from me by then. Never mind, I'll be fine. Just try not to kill each other while I'm down here. She dropped down the hole. Leo and Frank blocked her from view as best they could. They stood shoulder to shoulder, trying to look casual, like it was completely natural for two teenage guys to hang around Raphael's tomb. Tour groups came and went. Most ignored Leo and Frank. A few people glanced at them apprehensively and kept walking. Maybe the tourists thought they would ask for tips. For some reason, Leo could unnerve people when he grinned. The 3 American manatees were still hanging out in the middle of the room. One of them wore a t-shirt that said Roma, as if he'd forget which city he was in if he didn't wear it. Every once in a while, he would glance over at Leo and Frank like he found their presence distasteful. Something about that dude bothered Leo. He wished Hazel would hurry up. She talked to me earlier, Frank said abruptly. Hazel told me you figured out about my lifeline. Leo stirred. He'd almost forgotten Frank was standing next to him. Your lifeline? Oh, the burning stick, right. Leo resisted the urge to set his hand ablaze and yell, Wah! The idea was sort of funny, but he wasn't that cruel. Look, man, he said. It's cool. I'd never do anything to put you in danger. We're on the same team. Frank fiddled with his Centurion badge. I always knew fire could kill me, but since my grandmother's mansion burned down in Vancouver, it seems a lot more real. Leo nodded. He felt sympathy for Frank, but the guy didn't make it easy when he talked about his family mansion. Sort of like saying, I crashed my Lamborghini and waited for people to say, oh, you poor baby. Of course, Leo didn't tell him that. Your grandmother, did she die in the fire? You didn't say. I don't know. She was sick and pretty old. She said she would die in her own time, in her own way. But I think she made it out of the fire. I saw this bird flying up from the flames. Leo thought about that. So your whole family has the shape-changing thing? I guess, Frank said. My mum did. Grandmother thought that's what got her killed in Afghanistan in the war. Mum tried to help some of her buddies and I don't know exactly what happened. There was a firebomb. Leo winced with sympathy. So we both lost our mums to fire. He hadn't been planning on it, but he told Frank the whole story of the night at the workshop when Gaia had appeared to him and his mother had died. Frank's eyes got watery. I never like it when people tell me, sorry about your mum. It never feels genuine, Leo agreed. But I'm sorry about your mum. Thanks. No sign of Hazel. The American tourists were still milling around the Pantheon. They seemed to be circling closer, like they were trying to sneak up on Raphael's tomb without it noticing. Back at Camp Jupiter, Frank said, our cabin, La, Reticulus, told me I have more power than most demigods, being a son of Mars, plus having the shape-changing ability from my mum's side. He said that's why my life is tied to a burning stick. It's such a huge weakness that it kind of balances things out. Leo remembered his conversation with Nemesis, the revenge goddess at the Great Salt Lake. She'd said something similar about wanting the scales to balance. Good luck is a sham. True success requires sacrifice. Her fortune cookie was still in Leo's tool belt, waiting to be opened. Soon you will face a problem you cannot solve, though I could help you, for a price. Leo wished he could pluck that memory out of his head and shove it in his tool belt. It was taking up too much space. We've all got weaknesses, he said. Me, for instance. I'm tragically funny and good-looking. Frank snorted. You might have weaknesses, but your life doesn't depend on a piece of firewood. No, Leo admitted. He started thinking. If Frank's problem were his problem, how would he solve it? Almost every design flaw could be fixed. I wonder. He looked across the room and faltered. The 3 American tourists were coming their way. No more circling or sneaking. They were making a straight line for Raphael's tomb, and all 3 were glaring at Leo. Frank, Leo asked, has it been 10 minutes yet? Frank followed his gaze. The Americans' faces were angry and confused, like they were sleepwalking through a very annoying nightmare. Leo Valdez, called the guy in the Roma shirt. His voice had changed. It was hollow and metallic. He spoke English, as if it was a second language. We meet again. All 3 tourists blinked, and their eyes turned solid gold. Frank yelped. Eidolons. The manatees clenched their beefy fists. Normally, Leo wouldn't have worried about getting murdered by overweight guys in floppy hats, but he suspected the Eidolons were dangerous even in these bodies, especially since the spirits wouldn't care whether their host survived or not. They can't fit down the hole, Leo said. Right, Frank said. Underground is sounding really good. He turned into a snake and slithered over the edge. Leo jumped in after him while the spirits began to wail above. Valdez! Kill Valdez! Chapter 38. Leo. One problem solved. The hatch above them closed automatically, cutting off their pursuers. It also cut off all light, but Leo and Frank could deal with that. Leo just hoped they didn't need to get out the same way they came in. He wasn't sure he could open the tile from underneath. At least the possessed manatee dudes were on the other side. Over Leo's head, the marble floor shuddered, like fat touristy feet were kicking it. Frank must have turned back to a human form. Leo could hear him wheezing in the dark. "What now?" Frank asked. "Okay, don't freak," Leo said. "I'm going to summon a little fire, just so we can see." "Thanks for the warning." Leo's index finger blazed like a birthday candle. In front of them stretched a stone tunnel with a low ceiling. Just as Hazel had predicted, it slanted down, and then levelled out and went south. "Well," Leo said, "it only goes in one direction." "Let's find Hazel," Frank said. Leo had no argument with that suggestion. They made their way down the corridor, Leo going first with the fire. He was glad to have Frank at his back, big and strong and able to turn into scary animals in case those possessed tourists somehow broke through the hatch, squeezed inside and followed them. He wondered if the Eidolons might just leave those bodies behind, seep underground and possess one of them instead. "Oh, there's my happy thought for the day," Leo scolded himself. After 100 feet or so, they turned a corner and found Hazel. In the light of her golden cavalry sword, she was examining a door. She was so engrossed she didn't notice them until Leo said, "Hi." Hazel whirled, trying to swing her spather. Fortunately for Leo's face, the blade was too long to wield in the corridor. "What are you doing here?" Hazel demanded. Leo gulped. "Sorry, we ran into some angry tourists." He told her what had happened. She hissed in frustration. "I hate Eidolons. I thought Piper made them promise to stay away." "Oh," Frank said, like he just had his own daily happy thought. "Piper made them promise to stay off the ship and not possess any of us. But if they followed us and used other bodies to attack us, then they're not technically breaking their vow." "Great," Leo muttered. "Eidolons who are also lawyers. Now, I really want to kill them." "Okay, forget them for now," Hazel said. "This door is giving me fits. Leo, can you try your skill with the lock?" Leo cracked his knuckles. "Stand aside for the master, please." The door was interesting, much more complicated than the Roman numeral combination lock above. The entire door was coated in imperial gold. A mechanical sphere, about the size of a bowling ball, was embedded in the centre. The sphere was constructed from 5 concentric rings, each inscribed with zodiac symbols, the bull, the scorpion, etc., and seemingly random numbers and letters. "These letters are Greek," Leo said in surprise. "Well, lots of Romans spoke Greek," Hazel said. "I guess," Leo said, "but this workmanship, no offence to you Camp Jupiter types, but this is too complicated to be Roman." Frank snorted, "Whereas you Greeks just love making things complicated." "Hey," Leo protested, "all I'm saying is this machinery is delicate, sophisticated. It reminds me of..." Leo stared at the sphere, trying to recall where he'd read or heard about a similar ancient machine. "It's a more advanced sort of lock," he decided. "You line up the symbols on the different rings in the right order, and that opens the door." "But what's the right order?" Hazel asked. "Good question. Greek spheres, astronomy, geometry." Leo got a warm feeling inside. "Oh, no way. I wonder. What's the value of pi?" Frank frowned. "What kind of pi?" "He means the number," Hazel guessed. "I learned that in maths class once, but..." "It's used to measure circles," Leo said. "This sphere, if it's made by the guy I'm thinking of." Hazel and Frank both stared at him blankly. "Never mind," Leo said. "I'm pretty sure pi is 3.1415 blah blah blah. The number goes on forever, but the sphere has only 5 rings, so that should be enough, if I'm right." "And if you're not?" Frank asked. "Well then," Leo felt fall down, go boom. "Let's find out." He turned the rings, starting on the outside and moving in. He ignored the zodiac signs and letters, lining up the correct numbers so they made the value of pi. Nothing happened. "I'm stupid," Leo mumbled. "Pi would expand outwards because it's infinite." He reversed the order of the numbers, starting in the centre and working towards the edge. When he aligned the last ring, something inside the sphere clicked. The door swung open. Leo beamed at his friends. "That, good people, is how we do things in the Leo world. Come on in." "I hate Leo world," Frank muttered. Hazel laughed. Inside was enough cool stuff to keep Leo busy for years. The room was about the size of the forge back at Camp Half-Blood, with bronze-topped work tables. Along the walls and baskets full of ancient metalworking tools. Dozens of bronze and gold spheres, like steampunk basketballs, sat around in various stages of disassembly. Loose gears and wiring littered the floor. Thick metal cables ran from each table towards the back of the room, where there was an enclosed loft, like a theatre's sound booth. Stairs led up to the booth on either side. All the cables seemed to run into it. Next to the stairs on the left, a row of cubbyholes was filled with leather cylinders, probably ancient scroll cases. Leo was about to head towards the tables when he glanced to his left and nearly jumped out of his shoes. Flanking the doorway were two armoured mannequins, like skeletal scarecrows made from bronze pipes, outfitted with full suits of Roman armour, shield and sword. Dude, Leo walked up to one. These would be awesome if they worked. Frank edged away from the mannequins. Those things are going to come alive and attack us, aren't they? Leo laughed. Not a chance. They aren't complete. He tapped the nearest mannequin's neck, where loose copper wires sprouted from underneath its breastplate. Look, the head's wiring has been disconnected, and here at the elbow, the pulley system for this joint is out of alignment. My guess, the Romans were trying to duplicate a Greek design, but they didn't have the skill. Hazel arched her eyebrows. The Romans weren't good enough at being complicated, I suppose. Or delicate, Frank added. Or sophisticated. Hey, I just call it like you see it. Leo jiggled the mannequin's head, making it nod like it was agreeing with him. Still, a pretty impressive try. I've heard legends that the Romans confiscated the writings of Archimedes, but... Archimedes? Hazel looked baffled. Wasn't he an ancient mathematician or something? Leo laughed. He was a lot more than that. He was only the most famous son of Hephaestus who ever lived. Frank scratched his ear. I've heard his name before, but how can you be sure this mannequin is his design? It has to be, Leo said. Look, I've read all about Archimedes. He's a hero to Cabin 9. The dude was Greek, right? He lived in one of the Greek colonies in southern Italy, back before Rome got all huge and took over. Finally, the Romans moved in and destroyed his city. The Roman general wanted to spare Archimedes because he was so valuable, sort of like the Einstein of the ancient world. But some stupid Roman soldier killed him. There you go again, Hazel muttered. Stupid and Roman don't always go together, Leo. Frank grunted agreement. How do you know all this anyway? He demanded. Is there a Spanish tour guide around here? No, man, Leo said. You can't be a demigod who's into building stuff and not know about Archimedes. The guy was seriously elite. He calculated the value of pi. He did all this math stuff we still use for engineering. He invented a hydraulic screw that could move water through pipes. Hazel scowled. A hydraulic screw? Excuse me for not knowing about that awesome achievement. He also built a death ray made of mirrors that could burn enemy ships, Leo said. Is that awesome enough for you? I saw something about that on TV, Frank admitted. They proved it didn't work. Ah, that's just because modern mortals don't know how to use celestial bronze, Leo said. That's the key. Archimedes also invented a massive claw that could swing on a crane and pluck enemy ships out of the water. Okay, that's cool, Frank admitted. I love grabber arm games. Well, there you go, Leo said. Anyway, all his inventions weren't enough. The Romans destroyed his city. Archimedes was killed. According to legends, the Roman general was a big fan of his work, so he raided Archimedes' workshop and carted a bunch of souvenirs back to Rome. They disappeared from history, except... Leo waved his hands at the stuff on the tables. Here they are. Metal basketballs? Hazel asked. Leo couldn't believe that they didn't appreciate what they were looking at, but he tried to contain his irritation. Guys, Archimedes constructed spheres. The Romans couldn't figure them out. They thought they were just for telling time or following constellations because they were covered with pictures of stars and planets. But that's like finding a rifle and thinking it's a walking stick. Leo, the Romans were top-notch engineers, Hazel reminded him. They built aqueducts, roads, siege weapons, Frank added. Public sanitation. Yeah, fine, Leo said. But Archimedes was in a class by himself. His spheres could do all sorts of things, only nobody is sure. Suddenly, Leo got an idea so incredible that his nose burst into flames. He patted it out as quickly as possible. Man, it was embarrassing when that happened. He ran to the row of cubbyholes and examined the markings on the scroll cases. Oh gods, this is it. He gingerly lifted out one of the scrolls. He wasn't great in ancient Greek, but he could tell the inscription on the case read, "On building spheres." Guys, this is the lost book. His hands were shaking. Archimedes wrote this, describing his construction methods, but all the copies were lost in ancient times. If I can translate this... The possibilities were endless. For Leo, the quest had now totally taken on a new dimension. Leo had to get the spheres and scrolls safely out of here. He had to protect this stuff until he could get it back to Bunker 9 and study it. The secrets of Archimedes, he murmured. Guys, this is bigger than Daedalus's laptop. If there's a Roman attack on Camp Half-Blood, these secrets could save the camp. They might even give us an edge over Gaia and the giants. Hazel and Frank glanced at each other skeptically. Okay, Hazel said. We didn't come here for a scroll, but I guess we can take it with us. Assuming, Frank added, that you don't mind sharing its secrets with us, stupid, uncomplicated Romans. What? Leo stared at him blankly. No, look, I didn't mean to insult. Never mind. The point is, this is good news. For the first time in days, Leo felt really hopeful. Naturally, that's when everything went wrong. On the table next to Hazel and Frank, one of the orbs clicked and whirred. A row of spindly legs extended from its equator. The orb stood, and two bronze cables shot out of the top, hitting Hazel and Frank like taser wires. Leo's friends both crumpled to the floor. Leo lunged to help them, but the two armoured mannequins that couldn't possibly move did move. They drew their swords and stepped towards Leo. The one on the left turned its crooked helmet, which was shaped like a wolf's head. Despite the fact that it had no face or mouth, a familiar, hollow voice spoke from behind its visor. "You cannot escape us, Leo Valdez," it said. "We do not like possessing machines, but they are better than tourists. You will not leave here alive." Chapter 39. Leo. Leo agreed with Nemesis about one thing. Good luck was a sham, at least when it came to Leo's luck. Last winter he had watched in horror while a family of Cyclopses prepared to roast Jason and Piper with hot sauce. He'd schemed his way out of that one and saved his friends all by himself, but at least he'd had time to think. Now, not so much. Hazel and Frank had been knocked out by the tendrils of a possessed steampunk bowling ball. Two suits of armour with bad attitudes were about to kill him. Leo couldn't blast them with fire. Suits of armour wouldn't be hurt by that. Besides, Hazel and Frank were too close. He didn't want to burn them or accidentally hit the piece of firewood that controlled Frank's life. On Leo's right, the suit of armour with a lion's head helmet creaked its wiry neck and regarded Hazel and Frank, who were still lying unconscious. "A male and female demigod," said Lionhead. "These will do, if the others die." Its hollow face mask turned back to Leo. "We do not need you, Leo Valdez." "Oh, hey!" Leo tried for a winning smile. "You always need Leo Valdez." He spread his hands and hoped he looked confident and useful, not desperate and terrified. He wondered if it was too late to write Team Leo on his shirt. Sadly, the suits of armour were not as easily swayed as the Narcissus fan club had been. The one with the wolf-headed helmet snarled, "I have been in your mind, Leo. I helped you start the war." Leo's smile crumbled. He took a step back. "That was you." Now he understood why those tourists had bothered him right away, and why this thing's voice sounded so familiar. He'd heard it in his mind. "You made me fire that ballista," Leo demanded. "You call that helping?" "I know how you think," said Wolfhead. "I know your limits. You are small and alone. You need friends to protect you. Without them you are unable to withstand me. I vowed not to possess you again, but I can still kill you." The armoured dudes stepped forward. The points of their swords hovered a few inches from Leo's face. Leo's fear suddenly made way for a whole lot of anger. This eidolon in the wolf helmet had shamed him, controlled him, and made him attack New Rome. It had endangered his friends and botched their quest. Leo glanced at the dormant spheres on the work tables. He considered his tool belt. He thought about the loft behind him, the area that looked like a sound booth. Presto, Operation Junk Pile was born. "First, you don't know me," he told Wolfhead, and second, bye. He lunged for the stairs and bounded to the top. The suits of armour were scary, but they were not fast. As Leo suspected, the loft had doors on either side, folding metal gates. The operators would have wanted protection in case their creations went haywire. Like now. Leo slammed both gates shut and summoned fire to his hands, fusing the locks. The suits of armour closed in on either side. They rattled the gates, hacking at them with their swords. "This is foolish," said Lionhead. "You only delay your death." Delaying death is one of my favourite hobbies. Leo scanned his new home. Overlooking the workshop was a single table like a control board. It was crowded with junk, and most of it Leo dismissed immediately. A diagram for a human catapult that would never work. A strange black sword. Leo was no good with swords. A large bronze mirror. Leo's reflection looked terrible, and a set of tools that someone had broken, either in frustration or clumsiness. He focused on the main project. In the centre of the table, someone had disassembled an Archimedes sphere. Gears, springs, levers and rods were littered around it. All the bronze cables to the room below were connected to a metal plate under the sphere. Leo could sense the celestial bronze running through the workshop like arteries from a heart, ready to conduct magical energy from the spot. "One basketball to rule them all," Leo muttered. This sphere was a master regulator. He was standing at ancient Rome mission control. "Leo Valdez," the spirit howled. "Open this gate or I will kill you." "A fair and generous offer," Leo said, his eyes still on the sphere. "Just let me finish this. A last request, all right?" That must have confused the spirits, because they momentarily stopped hacking at the bars. Leo's hands flew over the sphere, reassembling its missing pieces. Why did the stupid Romans have to take apart such a beautiful machine? They had killed Archimedes, stolen his stuff, then messed with a piece of equipment they could never understand. On the other hand, at least they'd had the sense to lock it away for 2,000 years so that Leo could retrieve it. The Eidolons started pounding on the gates again. "Who is it?" Leo called. "Valdez!" Wolfhead bellowed. "Valdez who?" Leo asked. Eventually the Eidolons would realise they couldn't get in. Then, if Wolfhead truly knew Leo's mind, he would decide there were other ways to force his cooperation. Leo had to work faster. He connected the gears, got one wrong and had to start again. Hephaestus's hand grenades. This was hard. Finally he got the last spring in place. The ham-fisted Romans had almost ruined the tension adjuster, but Leo pulled a set of watchmaker's tools from his belt and did some final calibrations. Archimedes was a genius, assuming this thing actually worked. He wound the starter coil. The gears began to turn. Leo closed the top of the sphere and studied its concentric circles, similar to the ones on the workshop door. "Valdez!" Wolfhead pounded on the gate. "Our third comrade will kill your friends." Leo cursed under his breath. Our third comrade. He glanced down at the spindly-legged taser ball that had knocked out Hazel and Frank. He had figured Eidolon number 3 was hiding inside that thing, but Leo still had to deduce the right sequence to activate the control sphere. "Yeah, okay," he called. "You got me. Just a sec." "No more seconds," Wolfhead shouted. "Open this gate now, or they die." The possessed taser ball lashed out with its tendrils and sent another shock through Hazel and Frank. Their unconscious bodies flinched. That kind of electricity might have stopped their hearts. Leo held back tears. This was too hard. He couldn't do it. He stared at the face of the sphere. 7 rings, each one covered with tiny Greek letters, numbers and zodiac signs. The answer wouldn't be pi. Archimedes would never do the same thing twice. Besides, just by putting his hand on the sphere, Leo could feel that the sequence had been generated randomly. It was something only Archimedes would know. Supposedly, Archimedes' last words had been, "Don't disturb my circles." No one knew what that meant, but Leo could apply it to this sphere. The lock was much too complicated. Maybe if Leo had a few years, he could decipher the markings and figure out the right combination. But he didn't have a few seconds. He was out of time, out of luck, and his friends were going to die. "A problem you cannot solve," said a voice in his mind. Nemesis. She told him to expect this moment. Leo thrust his hand in his pocket and brought out the fortune cookie. The goddess had warned him of a great price for her help, as great as losing an eye. But if he didn't try, his friends would die. "I need the access code for this sphere," he said. He broke open the cookie. Chapter 40. Leo. Leo unfurled the little strip of paper. It read, "That's your request? Seriously? Over." On the back, the paper said, "Your lucky numbers are 12, Jupiter, Orion, Delta, 3, Theta, Omega. Wreak vengeance upon Gaia, Leo Valdez." With trembling fingers, Leo turned the rings. Outside the gates, Wolfhead growled in frustration. "If friends do not matter to you, perhaps you need more incentive. Perhaps I should destroy these scrolls instead. Priceless works by Archimedes." The last ring clicked into place. The sphere hummed with power. Leo ran his hands along the surface, sensing tiny buttons and levers awaiting his commands. Magical and electrical pulses cursed via the celestial bronze cables and surged through the entire room. Leo had never played a musical instrument, but he imagined it must be like this, knowing each key or note so well that you didn't really think about what your hands were doing. You just concentrated on the kind of sound you wanted to create. He started small. He focused on one reasonably intact gold sphere, down in the main room. The gold sphere shuddered. It grew a tripod of legs and clattered over to the taser ball. A tiny circular saw popped out of the gold sphere's head, and it began cutting into taser ball's brain. Leo tried to activate another orb. This one burst in a small mushroom cloud of bronze dust and smoke. "Oops," he muttered. "Sorry, Archimedes." "What are you doing?" Wolfhead demanded. "Stop your foolishness and surrender." "Oh, yes, I surrender," Leo said. "I'm totally surrendering." He tried to take control of a third orb. That one broke too. Leo felt bad about ruining all these ancient inventions, but this was life or death. Frank had accused him of caring more for machines than people, but if it came down to saving old spheres or his friends, there was no choice. The fourth try went better. A ruby-encrusted orb popped its top and helicopter blades unfolded. Leo was glad Buford the table wasn't here. He would have fallen in love. The ruby orb spun into the air and sailed straight for the cubbyholes. Thin golden arms extended from its middle and snapped up the precious scroll cases. "Enough!" Wolfhead yelled. "I will destroy the—" He turned in time to see the ruby sphere take off with the scrolls. It zipped across the room and hovered in the far corner. "What?" Wolfhead cried. "Kill the prisoners!" He must have been talking to the taser ball. Unfortunately, taser ball was in no shape to comply. Leo's gold sphere was sitting on top of its sword-open head, picking through its gears and wires like it was scooping out a pumpkin. Thank the gods, Hazel and Frank began to stir. Bah! Wolfhead gestured to Lionhead at the opposite gate. Come, we will destroy the demigods ourselves. I don't think so, guys. Leo turned towards Lionhead. His hands worked the control sphere, and he felt a shock travel through the floor. Lionhead shuddered and lowered his sword. Leo grinned. You're in Leo world now. Lionhead turned and stormed down the stairs. Instead of advancing on Hazel and Leo, he marched up the opposite stairs and faced his comrade. What are you doing? Wolfhead demanded. We have to. Blong! Lionhead slammed his shield into Wolfhead's chest. He smashed the pommel of his sword into his comrade's helmet, so Wolfhead became flat, deformed, not very happy Wolfhead. Stop that! Wolfhead demanded. I cannot! Lionhead wailed. Leo was getting the hang of it now. He commanded both suits of armour to drop their swords and shields and slap each other repeatedly. Valdez! Called Wolfhead in a warbling voice. You will die for this. Yeah, Leo called out. Who's possessing who now, Casper? The machine men tumbled down the stairs, and Leo forced them to jitterbug like 1920s flappers. Their joints began smoking. The other spheres around the room began to pop. Too much energy was surging through the ancient system. The control sphere in Leo's hand grew uncomfortably warm. Frank, Hazel, Leo shouted. Take cover. His friends were still dazed, staring in amazement at the jitterbuggering mental guys, but they got his warning. Frank pulled Hazel under the nearest table and shielded her with his body. One last twist of the sphere, and Leo sent a massive jolt through the system. The armoured warriors blew apart. Rods, pistons and bronze shards flew everywhere. On all the tables, spheres popped like hot soda cans. Leo's gold sphere froze. His flying ruby orb dropped to the floor with the scroll cases. The room was suddenly quiet, except for a few random sparks and sizzles. The air smelled like burning car engines. Leo raced down the stairs and found Frank and Hazel safe under their table. He had never been so happy to see those two hugging. You're alive, he said. Hazel's left eye twitched, maybe from the taser shock. Otherwise, she looked okay. What exactly happened? Archimedes came through, Leo said. Just enough power left in those old machines for one final show. Once I had the access code, it was easy. He patted the control sphere, which was steaming in a bad way. Leo didn't know if it could be fixed, but at the moment, he was too relieved to care. The Eidolons, Frank said. Are they gone? Leo grinned. My last command overloaded their kill switches, basically locked down all their circuits and melted their cores. In English? Frank asked. It trapped the Eidolons inside the wiring, Leo said. Then I melted them. They won't be bothering anyone again. Leo helped his friends to their feet. You saved us, Frank said. Don't sound so surprised. Leo glanced around the destroyed workshop. Too bad all this stuff got wrecked, but at least I salvaged the scrolls. If I can get them back to Camp Half-Blood, maybe I can learn how to recreate Archimedes' inventions. Hazel rubbed the side of her head. But I don't understand. Where is Nico? That tunnel was supposed to lead us to Nico. Leo had almost forgotten why they'd come down here in the first place. Nico obviously wasn't here. The place was a dead end. So why? Oh, he felt like there was a buzzsaw sphere on his own head, pulling out his wires and gears. Hazel, how exactly were you tracking Nico? I mean, would you just sense him nearby because he was your brother? She frowned, still looking a bit wobbly from her electric shock treatment. Not really. Sometimes I can tell when he's close, but like I said, Rome is so confusing, so much interference because of all the tunnels and caves. You tracked him with your metal-finding senses, Leo guessed. His sword? She blinked. How did you know? You'd better come here. He led Hazel and Frank up to the control room and pointed to the black sword. Oh no. Hazel would have collapsed if Frank hadn't caught her. But that's impossible. Nico's sword was with him in the bronze jar. Percy saw it in his dream. Either the dream was wrong, Leo said, or the giants moved the sword here as a decoy. So, this was a trap, Frank said. We were lured here. But why? Hazel cried. Where's my brother? A hissing sound filled the control booth. At first, Leo thought the Eidolons were back. Then he realized the bronze mirror on the table was steaming. Ah, my poor demigods. The sleeping face of Gaia appeared in the mirror. As usual, she spoke without moving her mouth, which could only have been creepier if she'd had a ventriloquism puppet. Leo hated those things. You had your choice, Gaia said. Her voice echoed through the room. It seemed to be coming not just from the mirror, but from the stone walls as well. Leo realized she was all around them. Of course, they were in the earth. They'd gone to all the trouble of building the Argo 2 so they could travel by sea and air, and they then ended up in the earth anyway. I offered salvation to all of you, Gaia said. You could have turned back. Now it is too late. You've come to the ancient lands where I am strongest, where I will awake. Leo pulled a hammer from his tool belt. He whacked the mirror. Being metal, it just quivered like a tea tray, but it felt good to smash Gaia in the nose. In case you haven't noticed, Dirtface, he said, your little ambush failed. Your 3 eidolons got melted in bronze and we're fine. Gaia laughed softly. Oh, my sweet Leo, you 3 have been separated from your friends. That was the whole point. The workshop door slammed shut. You are trapped in my embrace, Gaia said. Meanwhile, Annabeth Chase faces her death alone, terrified and crippled at the hands of her mother's greatest enemy. The image in the mirror changed. Leo saw Annabeth sprawled on the floor of a dark cavern, holding up her bronze knife as if warding off a monster. Her face was gaunt. Her leg was wrapped in some sort of splint. Leo couldn't see what she was looking at, but it was obviously something horrible. He wanted to believe the image was a lie, but he had a bad feeling it was real, and it was happening right now. The others, Gaia said, Jason Grace, Piper McLean, and my dear friend Percy Jackson. They will perish within minutes. The scene changed again. Percy was holding Riptide, leading Jason and Piper down a spiral staircase into the darkness. Their powers will betray them, Gaia said. They will die in their own elements. I almost hoped they would survive. They would have made a better sacrifice, but alas, Hazel and Frank, you will have to do. My minions will collect you shortly and bring you to the ancient place. Your blood will awaken me at last. Until then, I will allow you to watch your friends perish. Please enjoy this last glimpse of your failed quest. Leo couldn't stand it. His hand glowed white hot. Hazel and Frank scrambled back as he pressed his palm against the mirror and melted it into a puddle of bronze goo. The voice of Gaia went silent. Leo could only hear the roar of blood in his ears. He took a shaky breath. Sorry, he told his friends. She was getting annoying. What do we do? Frank asked. We have to get out and help the others. Leo scanned the workshop, now littered with smoking pieces of broken spheres. His friends still needed him. This was still his show. As long as he had his tool belt, Leo Valdez wasn't going to sit around helplessly watching the Demigod Death Channel. I've got an idea, he said, but it's going to take all 3 of us. He started telling them the plan. Chapter 41. Piper. Piper tried to make the best of the situation. Once she and Jason had got tired of pacing the deck, listening to Coach Hedge sing Old MacDonald with weapons instead of animals, they decided to have a picnic in the park. Hedge grudgingly agreed. Stay where I can see you. What are we, kids? Jason asked. Hedge snorted. Kids are baby goats. They're cute and they have redeeming social value. You are definitely not kids. They spread their blanket under a willow tree next to a pond. Piper turned over her cornucopia and spilled out an entire meal. Neatly wrapped sandwiches, canned drinks, fresh fruit, and for some reason a birthday cake with purple icing and candles already lit. She frowned. Is it someone's birthday? Jason winced. I wasn't going to say anything. Jason! There's too much going on, he said, and honestly, before last month I didn't even know when my birthday was. Thalia told me the last time she was at camp. Piper wondered what that would be like, not even knowing the day you were born. Jason had been given to Lupa the wolf when he was only 2 years old. He'd never really known his mortal mum. He'd only been reunited with his sister last winter. July 1st, Piper said. The calends of July. Yeah, Jason smirked. The Romans would find that auspicious. The first day of the month named for Julius Caesar. Juno's sacred day. Yippee! Piper didn't want to push it or make a celebration if he didn't feel like celebrating. 16? She asked. He nodded. Oh boy, I can get my driver's license. Piper laughed. Jason had killed so many monsters and saved the world so many times that the idea of him sweating a driving test seemed ridiculous. She pictured him behind the wheel of some old Lincoln with a student driver sign on top and a grumpy teacher in the passenger seat with an emergency brake pedal. Well, she urged, blow out the candles. Jason did. Piper wondered if he'd made a wish, hopefully that he and Piper would survive the quest and stay together forever. She decided not to ask him. She didn't want to jinx that wish, and she definitely didn't want to find out that he'd wished for something different. Since they'd left the Pillars of Hercules yesterday evening, Jason had seemed distracted. Piper couldn't blame him. Hercules had been a pretty huge disappointment as a big brother, and the old river god Aeschylus had said some unflattering things about the sons of Jupiter. Piper stared at the cornucopia. She wondered if Aeschylus was getting used to having no horns at all. She hoped so. Sure, he had tried to kill them, but Piper still felt bad for the old god. She didn't understand how such a lonely, depressed spirit could produce a horn of plenty that shot out pineapples and birthday cakes. Could it be that the cornucopia had drained all the goodness out of him? Maybe now that the horn was gone, Aeschylus would be able to fill up with some happiness and keep it for himself. She also kept thinking about Aeschylus's advice. If you had made it to Rome, the story of the flood would have served you better. She knew the story he was talking about. She just didn't understand how it would help. Jason plucked an extinguished candle from his cake. I've been thinking. That snapped Piper back to the present. Coming from your boyfriend. I've been thinking was kind of a scary line. About, she asked. Camp Jupiter, he said. All the years I trained there. We were always pushing teamwork, working as a unit. I thought he understood what that meant. But honestly, I was always the leader, even when I was younger. The son of Jupiter, Piper said. Most powerful kid in the Legion. You were the star. Jason looked uncomfortable, but he didn't deny it. Being in this crew of 7, I'm not sure what to do. I'm not used to being one of so many. Well, equals. I feel like I'm failing. Piper took his hand. You're not failing. It sure felt that way when Creosaur attacked, Jason said. I've spent most of this trip knocked out and helpless. Come on, she chided. Being a hero doesn't mean you're invincible. It just means that you're brave enough to stand up and do what's needed. And if I don't know what's needed? That's what your friends are for. We've all got different strengths. Together we'll figure it out. Jason studied her. Piper wasn't sure he bought what she was saying, but she was glad he could confide in her. She liked it, that he had a little self-doubt. He didn't succeed all the time. He didn't think the universe owed him an apology whenever something went wrong, unlike another son of the sky god she'd recently met. Hercules was a jerk, he said, as if reading her thoughts. I never want to be like that. But I wouldn't have had the courage to stand up to him without you taking the lead. You were the hero that time. We can take turns, she suggested. I don't deserve you. You're not allowed to say that. Why not? It's a breakup line, unless you're breaking up. Jason leaned over and kissed her. The colours of the Roman afternoon suddenly seemed sharper, as if the world had switched to high definition. No breakups, he promised. I may have busted my head a few times, but I'm not that stupid. Good, she said. Now about the cake? Her voice faltered. Percy Jackson was running towards them, and Piper could tell from his expression that he brought bad news. They gathered on deck so that Coach Hedge could hear the story. When Percy was done, Piper still couldn't believe it. So, Annabeth was kidnapped on a motor scooter, she summed up, by Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. Not kidnapped exactly, Percy said, but I've got this bad feeling. He took a deep breath, like he was trying hard not to freak out. Anyway, she's gone. Maybe I shouldn't have let her, but you had to, Piper said. You knew she had to go alone. Besides, Annabeth is tough and smart. She'll be fine. Piper put some charm speak in her voice, which maybe wasn't cool, but Percy needed to be able to focus. If they went into battle, Annabeth wouldn't want him getting hurt because he was too distracted about her. His shoulders relaxed a little. Maybe you're right. Anyway, Tiberinus, said we had less time to rescue Nico than we thought. Hazel and the guys aren't back yet? Piper checked the time on the helm control. She hadn't realised how late it was getting. It's 2 in the afternoon. We said 3 o'clock for a rendezvous. At the latest, Jason said. Percy pointed at Piper's dagger. Tiberinus said you could find Nico's location. You know, with that. Piper bit her lip. The last thing she wanted to do was check Catoptris for more terrifying images. I've tried, she said. The dagger doesn't always show what I want to see. In fact, it hardly ever does. Please, Percy said. Try again. He pleaded with those sea-green eyes, like a cute baby seal that needed help. Piper wondered how Annabeth ever won an argument with this guy. Fine, she sighed, and drew her dagger. While you're at it, said Coach Hedge, see if you can get the latest baseball scores. Italians don't cover baseball worth beans. Shh! Piper studied the bronze blade. The light shimmered. She saw a loft apartment filled with Roman demigods. A dozen of them stood around a dining table as Octavian talked and pointed to a big map. Rayna paced next to the windows, gazing down at Central Park. That's not good, Jason muttered. They've already set up a forward base in Manhattan. And that map shows Long Island, Percy said. They're scouting the territory, Jason guessed, discussing invasion routes. Piper did not want to see that. She concentrated harder. Light rippled across the blade. She saw ruins, a few crumbling walls, a single column, a stone floor covered with moss and dead vines, all clustered on a grassy hillside dotted with pine trees. I was just there, Percy said. That's in the old forum. The view zoomed in. On one side of a stone floor, a set of stairs had been excavated, leading down to a modern iron gate with a padlock. The blade's image zoomed straight through the doorway, down a spiral stairwell, and into a dark cylindrical chamber like the inside of a grain silo. Piper dropped the blade. "What's wrong?" Jason asked. "It was showing us something." Piper felt like the boat was back on the ocean, rocking under her feet. "We can't go there." Percy frowned. "Piper, Nico is dying. We've got to find him, not to mention Rome is about to get destroyed." Her voice wouldn't work. She kept that vision of the circular room to herself for so long that now she found it impossible to talk about. She had a horrible feeling that explaining it to Percy and Jason wouldn't change anything. She couldn't stop what was about to happen. She picked up the knife again. Its hilt seemed colder than usual. She forced herself to look at the blade. She saw two giants in gladiator armour sitting on oversized praetors' chairs. The giants toasted each other with golden goblets as if they'd just won an important fight. Between them stood a large bronze jar. The vision zoomed in again. Inside the jar, Nico D'Angelo was curled in a ball, no longer moving, all the pomegranate seeds eaten. "We're too late," Jason said. "No," Percy said. "No, I can't believe that. Maybe he's gone into a deeper trance to buy time. We have to hurry." The blade's surface went dark. Piper slipped it back into its sheath, trying to keep her hands from shaking. She hoped that Percy was right and Nico was still alive. On the other hand, she didn't see how that image connected with the vision of the drowning room. Maybe the giants were toasting each other because she and Percy and Jason were dead. "We should wait for the others," she said. "Hazel, Frank and Leo should be back soon." "We can't wait," Percy insisted. Coach Hedge grunted. "It's just two giants. If you guys want, I can take them." Coach," Jason said, "that's a great offer, but we need you to man the ship. Or goat the ship, whatever." Hedge scowled. "And let you three have all the fun?" Percy gripped the satyr's arm. "Hazel and the others need you here. When they get back, they'll need your leadership. You're their rock." "Yeah," Jason managed to keep a straight face. "Leo always says you're his rock. You can tell him. Well, tell them where we've gone and bring the ship around to meet us at the forum." "And here." Piper unstrapped Catoptris and put it in Coach Hedge's hands. The satyr's eyes widened. A demigod was never supposed to leave her weapon behind, but Piper was fed up with evil visions. She'd rather face her death without any more previews. "Keep an eye on this. Keep an eye on us with the blade," she suggested, "and you can check the baseball scores." That sealed the deal. Hedge nodded grimly, prepared to do his part for the quest. "All right," he said, "but if any giants come this way, feel free to blast them," Jason said. "What about annoying tourists?" "No," they all said in unison. "Bah, fine. Just don't take too long or I'm coming after you with ballistae blazing." Chapter 42. Piper. Finding the place was easy. Percy led them right to it, on an abandoned stretch of hillside overlooking the ruined forum. Getting in was easy too. Jason's gold sword cut through the padlock, and the metal gate creaked open. No mortal saw them. No alarms went off. Stone steps spiraled down into the gloom. "I'll go first," Jason said. "No," Piper yelped. Both boys turned towards her. "Pipes, what is it?" Jason asked. "That image in the blade. You've seen it before, haven't you?" She nodded, her eyes stinging. "I don't know how to tell you. I saw the room down there filling with water. I saw the three of us drowning." Jason and Percy both frowned. "I can't drown," Percy said, though he sounded like he was asking a question. "Maybe the future has changed," Jason speculated. "In the image you showed us just now, there wasn't any water." Piper wished he was right, but she suspected they wouldn't be so lucky. "Look," Percy said, "I'll check it out first. It's fine. Be right back." Before Piper could object, he disappeared down the stairwell. She counted silently as they waited for him to come back. Somewhere around 35, she heard his footsteps, and he appeared at the top, looking more baffled than relieved. "Good news, no water," he said. "Bad news, I don't see any exits down there. And weird news, well, you should see this." They descended cautiously. Percy took the lead, with Riptide drawn. Piper followed, and Jason walked behind her, guarding their backs. Their stairwell was a cramped corkscrew of masonry, no more than 6 feet in diameter. Even though Percy had given the all clear, Piper kept her eyes open for traps. With every turn of the stairs, she anticipated an ambush. She had no weapon, just the cornucopia on a leather cord over her shoulder. If worst came to worst, the boys' swords wouldn't do much good in those close quarters. Maybe Piper could shoot their enemies with a high-velocity smoked ham. As they wound their way underground, Piper saw old graffiti gouged into the stones, Roman numerals, names and phrases in Italian. That meant other people had been down here more recently than the Roman Empire. But Piper wasn't reassured. If monsters were below, they'd ignore mortals, waiting for some nice, juicy demigods to come along. Finally, they reached the bottom. Percy turned. "Watch this last step." He jumped to the floor of the cylindrical room, which was 5 feet lower than the stairwell. Why would someone design a set of stairs like that? Piper had no idea. Maybe the room and the stairwell had been built during different time periods. She wanted to turn and exit, but she couldn't do that with Jason behind her, and she couldn't just leave Percy down there. She clambered down and Jason followed. The room was just like she'd seen it in Catoptris's Blade, except there was no water. The curved walls had once been painted with frescoes, which were now faded to eggshell white with only flecks of colour. The domed ceiling was about 50 feet above. Around the back side of the room, opposite the stairwell, 9 alcoves were carved into the wall. Each niche was about 5 feet off the floor and big enough for a human-sized statue, but each was empty. The air felt cold and dry. As Percy had said, there were no other exits. "All right," Percy raised his eyebrows. "Here's the weird part. Watch." He stepped to the middle of the room. Instantly, green and blue light rippled across the walls. Piper heard the sound of a fountain, but there was no water. There didn't seem to be any source of light except for Percy's and Jason's blades. "Do you smell the ocean?" Percy asked. Piper hadn't noticed at first. She was standing next to Percy, and he always smelled like the sea. But he was right. The scent of salt water and storm was getting stronger, like a summer hurricane approaching. "An illusion?" she asked. All of a sudden, she felt strangely thirsty. "I don't know," Percy said. "I feel like there should be water here, lots of water. But there isn't any. I've never been in a place like this." Jason moved in the row of niches. He touched the bottom shelf of the nearest one, which was just at his eye level. "This stone, it's embedded with seashells. This is a nymphaeum." Piper's mouth was definitely getting drier. "A what?" "We have one at Camp Jupiter," Jason said, "on Temple Hill. It's a shrine for the nymphs." Piper ran her hand along the bottom of another niche. Jason was right. The alcove was studded with cowries, conches and scallops. The seashells seemed to dance in the watery light. They were ice cold to the touch. Piper had always thought of nymphs as friendly spirits, silly and flirtatious, generally harmless. They got along well with the children of Aphrodite. They loved to share gossip and beauty tips. This place, though, didn't feel like the canoe lake back at Camp Half-Blood, or the streams in the woods where Piper normally met nymphs. This place felt unnatural, hostile, and very dry. Jason stepped back and examined the row of alcoves. Shrines like this were all over the place in ancient Rome. Rich people had them outside their villas to honour nymphs, to make sure the local water was always fresh. Some shrines were built around natural springs, but most were man-made. "So, no actual nymphs lived here?" Piper asked hopefully. "Not sure," Jason said. "This place, where we're standing, would have been a pool with a fountain. A lot of times, if the nymphaeum belonged to a demigod, he or she would invite nymphs to live there. If the spirits took up residence, that was considered good luck." "For the owner," Percy guessed. "But it would also bind the nymphs to the new water source, which would be great if the fountain was in a nice sunny park with fresh water pumped in through the aqueducts." "But this place has been underground for centuries," Piper guessed. "Dry and buried. What would happen to the nymphs?" The sound of water changed to a chorus of hissing, like ghostly snakes. The rippling light shifted from sea blue and green to purple and sickly lime. Above them, the 9 niches glowed. They were no longer empty. Standing in each was a withered old woman, so dried up and brittle they reminded Piper of mummies, except mummies didn't normally move. Their eyes were dark purple, as if the clear blue water of their life source had condensed and thickened inside them. Their fine silk dresses were now tattered and faded. Their hair had once been piled in curls arranged with jewels in the style of Roman noblewomen. But now their locks were dishevelled and as dry as straw. If water cannibals actually existed, Piper thought, this is what they looked like. "What would happen to the nymphs?" said the creature in the centre niche. She was in even worse shape than the others. Her back was hunched like the handle of a pitcher. Her skeletal hands had only the thinnest papery layer of skin. On her head, a battered wreath of golden laurels glinted in her roadkill hair. She fixed her purple eyes on Piper. "What an interesting question, my dear. Perhaps the nymphs would still be here, suffering, waiting for revenge." The next time she got a glance and a chance, Piper swore she would melt down Catoptris and sell it for scrap metal. The stupid knife never showed her the whole story. Sure, she'd seen herself drowning, but if she'd realised that 9 desiccated zombie nymphs would be waiting for her, she would never have come down here. She considered bolting for the stairs, but when she turned, the doorway had opened and disappeared. Naturally, nothing was there now but a blank wall. Piper suspected it wasn't just an illusion. Besides, she would never make it to the opposite side of the room before the zombie nymphs could jump on them. Jason and Percy stood to either side of her, their swords ready. Piper was glad to have them close, but she suspected their weapons wouldn't do any good. She'd seen what would happen in this room. Somehow these things were going to defeat them. "Who are you?" Percy demanded. The central nymph turned her head. "Ah, Names! We once had names. I was Hagno, the first of the 9. Piper thought it was a cruel joke that a hag like her would be named Hagno, but she decided not to say so. The 9, Jason repeated. The nymphs of this shrine. There were always 9 niches. Of course. Hagno bared her teeth in a vicious smile. But we are the original 9, Jason Grace, the ones who attended the birth of your father. Jason's sword dipped. You mean Jupiter? You were there when he was born. Zeus, we called him then, Hagno said. Such a squealing whelp. We attended Rhea in her labour. When the baby arrived, we hid him, so that his father, Kronos, would not eat him. Ah, he had lungs, that baby. It was all we could do to drown out the noise so Kronos could not find him. When Zeus grew up, we were promised eternal honours, but that was in the old country, in Greece. The other nymphs wailed and clawed at their niches. They seemed to be trapped in them, Piper realised, as if their feet were glued to the stone along with the decorative seashells. When Rome rose to power, we were invited here, Hagno said. A son of Jupiter tempted us with favours, a new home he promised, bigger and better, no down payment, an excellent neighbourhood. Rome will last forever. Forever, the others hissed. We gave in to temptation, Hagno said. We left our simple wells and springs on Mount Lycaeus and moved here. For centuries our lives were wonderful. Parties, sacrifices in our honour, new dresses and jewellery every week. All the demigods of Rome flirted with us and honoured us. The nymphs wailed and sighed. But Rome did not last, Hagno snarled. The aqueducts were diverted. Our master's villa was abandoned and torn down. We were forgotten, buried under the earth. But we could not leave. Our life sources were bound to this place. Our old master never saw fit to release us. For centuries we have withered here in the darkness, thirsty, so thirsty. The others clawed at their mouths. Piper felt her own throat closing up. I'm sorry for you, she said, trying to use a charm speak. That must have been terrible, but we are not your enemies. If we can help you. Oh, such a sweet voice, Hagno cried. Such beautiful features. I was once young like you. My voice was as soothing as a mountain stream. But do you know what happens to Nymph's mind when she is trapped in the dark, with nothing to feed on but hatred, nothing to drink but thoughts of violence? Yes, my dear, you can help us. Percy raised his hand. I'm the son of Poseidon. Maybe I can summon a new water source? Ha! Hagno cried, and the other 8 echoed. Ha ha ha! Indeed, son of Poseidon, Hagno said. I know your father well. Ephialtes and Otis promised you would come. Piper put her hand on Jason's arm for balance. The giants, she said. You're working for them. They are our neighbours, Hagno smiled. Their chambers lie beyond this place, where the aqueduct's water was diverted for the games. Once we have dealt with you. Once you have helped us. The twins have promised we will never suffer again. Hagno turned to Jason. You, child of Jupiter, for the horrible betrayal of your predecessor who brought us here, you shall pay. I know the sky god's powers. I raised him as a baby. Once we nymphs controlled the rain above our wells and springs. When I am done with you, we will have that power again. And Percy Jackson, child of the sea god, from you we will take water, an endless supply of water. Endless? Percy's eyes darted from one nymph to the other. Look, I don't know about endless, but maybe I could spare a few gallons? And you, Piper McLean. Hagno's purple eyes glistened. So young, so lovely, so gifted with your sweet voice. From you, we will reclaim our beauty. We have saved our last life force for this day. We are very thirsty. From you 3 we shall drink. All 9 niches glowed. The nymphs disappeared, and water poured from their alcoves. Sickly, dark water, like oil. Chapter 43. Piper. Piper needed a miracle. Not a bedtime story, but right then, standing in shock as black water poured in around her legs, she recalled the legend Aeschylus had mentioned, the story of the flood. Not the Noah story, but the Cherokee version that her father had used to tell her, with the dancing ghosts and the skeleton dog. When she was little, she would cuddle next to her dad in his big recliner. She'd gaze out of the windows at the Malibu coastline, and her dad would tell her the story he'd heard from Grandpa Tom, back on the res in Oklahoma. This man had a dog, her father always began. You can't start a story that way, Piper protested. You have to say once upon a time. Dad laughed. But this is a Cherokee story. They are pretty straightforward. So anyway, this man had a dog. Every day the man took his dog to the edge of the lake to get water, and the dog would bark furiously at the lake, like he was mad at it. Was he? Be patient, sweetheart. Finally the man got very annoyed with his dog for barking so much, and he scolded it. Bad dog! Stop barking at the water. It's only water. To his surprise, the dog looked right at him and began to talk. Our dog can say thank you, Piper volunteered, and she can bark out. Sort of, her dad agreed. But this dog spoke entire sentences. The dog said, "One day soon the storms will come, the waters will rise and everyone will drown. You can save yourself and your family by building a raft, but first you will need to sacrifice me. You must throw me into the water." "That's terrible," Piper said. "I would never drown my dog." The man probably said the same thing. He thought the dog was lying. I mean, once he got over the shock that his dog could talk. When he protested, the dog said, "If you don't believe me, look at the scruff of my neck. I am already dead." "That's sad. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked me to," her dad reminded her. And indeed, something about the story fascinated Piper. She had heard it dozens of times, but she kept thinking about it. "Anyway," said her dad. The man grabbed the dog by the scruff of its neck and saw that its skin and fur were already coming apart. Underneath was nothing but bones. The dog was a skeleton dog. "Gross!" "I agree." So with tears in his eyes, the man said goodbye to his annoying skeleton dog and tossed it into the water, where it promptly sank. The man built a raft, and when the flood came, he and his family survived. Without the dog? Yes, without the dog. When the rain subsided and the raft landed, the man and his family were the only ones alive. The man heard sounds from the other side of a hill, like thousands of people laughing and dancing. But when he raced to the top, alas, down below he saw nothing except bones littering the ground. Thousands of skeletons of all the people who had died in the flood. He realized the ghosts of the dead had been dancing. That was the sound he heard. Piper waited. And nothing. The end. You can't end it that way. Why were the ghosts dancing? "I don't know," Dad said. "Your grandfather never felt the need to explain. Maybe the ghosts were happy that one family had survived. Maybe they were enjoying the afterlife. They're ghosts, who can say?" Piper was very unsatisfied with that. She had so many unanswered questions. Did the family ever find another dog? Obviously not all dogs drowned, because she herself had a dog. She couldn't shake the story. She never looked at dogs the same way, wondering if one of them might be a skeleton dog, and she didn't understand why the family had to sacrifice their dog to survive. Sacrificing yourself to save your family seemed like a noble thing, a very dog-like thing to do. Now, in the Nymphaeum in Rome, as the dark water rose to her waist, Piper wondered why the river god Aeschylus had mentioned that story. She wished she had a raft, but she feared she was more like the skeleton dog. She was already dead. Chapter 44. Piper. The basin filled with alarming speed. Piper, Jason and Percy pounded on the walls, looking for an exit, but they found nothing. They climbed into the alcoves to gain some height, but with water pouring out of each niche in what was like trying to balance at the edge of a waterfall. Even as Piper stood in a niche, the water was soon up to her knees. From the floor it was probably 8 feet deep and rising fast. "I could try lightning," Jason said. "Maybe blast a hole in the roof." "That could bring down the whole room and crush us," Piper said. "Or electrocute us," Percy added. "Not many choices," Jason said. "Let me search the bottom," Percy said. "If this place was built as a fountain, there has to be a way to drain the thing. You guys, check the niches for secret exits. Maybe the seashells are knobs or something." It was a desperate idea, but Piper was glad for something to do. Percy jumped in the water. Jason and Piper climbed from niche to niche, kicking and pounding, wiggling and seashells and embedded in the stone, but they had no luck. Sooner than Piper expected, Percy broke the surface, gasping and flailing. She offered her hand and he almost pulled her in before she could help him up. "Couldn't breathe," he choked. "The water. Not normal. Hardly made it back." The life force of the nymphs, Piper thought. It was so poisoned and malicious, even a son of the sea god couldn't control it. As the water rose around her, Piper felt it affecting her too. Her leg muscles trembled, like she'd been running for miles. Her hands turned wrinkled and dry, despite being in the middle of a fountain. The boys moved sluggishly. Jason's face was pale. He seemed to be having trouble holding his sword. Percy was drenched and shivering. His hair didn't look quite so dark, as if the colour was leaching out. "They're taking our power," Piper said, "draining us." "Jason," Percy coughed, "do the lightning." Jason raised his sword. The room rumbled, but no lightning appeared. The roof didn't break. Instead, a miniature rainstorm formed at the top of the chamber. Rain poured down, filling the fountain even faster, but it wasn't normal rain. The stuff was just as dark as the water in the pool. Every drop stung Piper's skin. "Not what I wanted," Jason said. The water was up to their necks now. Piper could feel her strength fading. Grandpa Tom's story about the water cannibals was true. Bad nymphs would steal her life. "We'll survive," she murmured to herself, but she couldn't charm speak her way out of this. Soon the poisonous water would be over their heads. They'd have to swim, and this stuff was already paralysing them. They would drown, just like in the visions she'd seen. Percy started pushing the water away with the back of his hand like he was shooing a bad dog. Can't control it." "You will need to sacrifice me," the skeleton dog had said in the story. You must throw me into the water." Piper felt like someone had grabbed the scruff of her neck and exposed the bones. She clutched her cornucopia. "We can't fight this," she said. "If we hold back, that just makes us weaker." "What do you mean?" Jason shouted over the rain. The water was up to their chins, another few inches and they'd have to swim, but the water wasn't halfway to the ceiling yet. Piper hoped that meant they still had time. "The Horn of Plenty," she said. "We have to overwhelm the nymphs with fresh water, give them more than they can use, if we can dilute this poisonous stuff." "Can your horn do that?" Percy struggled to keep his head above water, which was obviously a new experience for him. He looked scared out of his mind. "Only with your help." Piper was beginning to understand how the horn worked. The good stuff it produced didn't come from nowhere. She'd only been able to bury Hercules in groceries when she had concentrated on all her positive experiences with Jason. To create enough clean, fresh water to fill this room, she needed to go even deeper, tap her emotions even more. Unfortunately, she was losing her ability to focus. "I need you both to channel everything you've got into the cornucopia," she said. "Percy, think about the sea." "Salt water? Doesn't matter, as long as it's clean." "Jason, think about rainstorms. Much, much more rain. Both of you, hold the cornucopia." They huddled together as the water lifted them off the ledges. Piper tried to remember the safety lessons her dad had given her when they had started surfing. To help someone who's drowning, you put your arm around them from behind and kick your legs in front of you, moving backwards like you're doing the backstroke. She wasn't sure if the same strategy would work with two other people, but she put one arm around each boy and tried to keep them afloat as they held the cornucopia between them. Nothing happened. The rain came down in sheets, still dark and acidic. Piper's legs felt like lead. The rising water swirled, threatening to pull her under. She could feel her strength fading. "No good," Jason yelled, spitting water. "We're getting nowhere," Percy agreed. "You have to work together," Piper cried, hoping she was right. "Both of you, think of clean water, a storm of water. Don't hold anything back. Picture all your power, all your strength leaving you." "That's not hard," Percy said. "But force it out," she said. "Offer up everything, like you're already dead and your only goal is to help the nymphs. It's got to be a gift, a sacrifice." They got quiet at that word. "Let's try again," Jason said. "Together." This time Piper bent all her concentration towards the Horn of Plenty as well. The nymphs wanted her youth, her life, her voice. Fine, she gave it up willingly and imagined all of her power flooding out of her. "I'm already dead," she told herself, as calm as the skeleton dog. "This is the only way." Clear water blasted from the horn with such force it pushed them against the wall. The rain changed to a white torrent, so clean and cold it made Piper gasp. "It's working," Jason cried. "Too well," Percy said. "We're filling the room even faster." He was right. The water rose so quickly the roof was now only a few feet away. Piper could have reached up and touched the miniature rain clouds. "Don't stop," she said. "We have to dilute the poison until the nymphs are cleansed." "What if they can't be cleansed?" Jason asked. "They've been down here turning evil for thousands of years." "Just don't hold back," Piper said. "Give everything. Give, even if we go under." Her head hit the ceiling. The rain clouds dissipated and melted into the water. The Horn of Plenty kept blasting out a clean torrent. Piper pulled Jason closer and kissed him. "I love you," she said. The words just poured out of her, like the water from the cornucopia. She couldn't tell what his reaction was, because then they were underwater. She held her breath. The current roared in her ears, bubbles swirled around her, light still rippled through the room, and Piper was surprised she could see it. Was the water getting clearer? Her lungs were about to burst, but Piper poured her last energy into the cornucopia. Water continued to stream out, though there was no room for more. Would the walls crack under the pressure? Piper's vision went dark. She thought the roar in her ears was her own dying heartbeat. Then she realized the room was shaking. The water swirled faster. Piper felt herself sinking. With her last strength, she kicked upward. Her head broke the surface, and she gasped for breath. The cornucopia stopped. The water was draining almost as fast as it had filled that room. With a cry of alarm, Piper realized that Percy's and Jason's faces were still underwater. She hoisted them up. Instantly, Percy gulped and began to thrash, but Jason was as lifeless as a rag doll. Piper clung to him. She yelled his name, shook him and slapped his face. She barely noticed when all the water had drained away and left them on the damp floor. "Jason," she said desperately she tried desperately to think. Should she turn him on his side, slap his back? "Piper," Percy said, "I can help." He knelt next to her and touched Jason's forehead. Water gushed from Jason's mouth. His eyes flew open and a clap of thunder threw Percy and Piper backwards. When Piper's vision cleared, she saw Jason sitting up, still gasping, but the colour was coming back to his face. "Sorry," he coughed. "Didn't mean to." Piper tackled him with a hug. She would have kissed him, but she didn't want to suffocate him. Percy grinned. "In case you're wondering, that was clean water in your lungs. I could make it come out with no problem." "Thanks, man." Jason clasped his hand weakly. "But I think Piper's the real hero. She saved us all." "Yes, she did." A voice echoed through the chamber. The niches glowed. 9 figures appeared, but they were no longer withered creatures. They were young, beautiful nymphs in shimmering blue gowns, their glossy black curls pinned up with silver and gold brooches. Their eyes were gentle shades of blue and green. As Piper watched, 8 of the nymphs dissolved into vapour and floated upward. Only the nymph in the centre remained. "Hagno?" Piper asked. The nymph smiled. "Yes, my dear. I didn't think such selflessness existed in mortals, especially in demigods. No offence." Percy got to his feet. "How could we take offence? You just tried to drown us and suck out our lives." Hagno winced. "Sorry about that. I was not myself, but you have reminded me of the sun and the rain and the streams in the meadows. Percy and Jason, thanks to you, I remembered the sea and the sky. I am cleansed, but mostly thanks to Piper. She shared something even better than clear running water." Hagno turned to her. "You have a good nature, Piper, and I'm a nature spirit. I know what I'm talking about." Hagno pointed to the other side of the room. The stairs to the surface reappeared. Directly underneath, a circular opening shimmered into existence, like a sewer pipe, just big enough to crawl through. Piper suspected this was how the water had drained out. "You may return to the surface," Hagno said, "or, if you insist, you may follow the waterway to the giants. But choose quickly, because both doors will fade soon after I am gone. That pipe connects to the old aqueduct line, which feeds both this nymphaeum and the hypogeum that the giants call home." "Ah," Percy pressed on his temples. "Please, no more complicated words." "Oh, home is not a complicated word." Hagno sounded completely sincere. "I thought it was, but now you have unbound us from this place. My sisters have gone to seek new homes, a mountain stream perhaps, or a lake in a meadow. I will follow them. I cannot wait to see the forests and grasslands again and the clear running water." "Ah," Percy said nervously, "things have changed up above in the last few thousand years." "Nonsense," Hagno said. "How bad could it be? Pan would not allow nature to become tainted. I can't wait to see him, in fact." Percy looked like he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. "Good luck, Hagno," Piper said, "and thank you." The nymph smiled one last time and vaporized. Briefly, the nymphaeum glowed with a softer light, like a full moon. Piper smelled exotic spices and blooming roses. She heard distant music and happy voices, talking and laughing. She guessed she was hearing hundreds of years of parties and celebrations that had been held at this shrine in ancient times, as if the memories had been freed along with the spirits. "What is that?" Jason asked nervously. Piper slipped her hand into his. "The ghosts are dancing. Come on, we'd better go meet the giants." Remember, head over to my Patreon page for amazing extra content. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye-bye.